The man at the computer felt like he'd been writing different versions of the same sentence his whole life, but it had been only 8 hours in the middle of his 30th birthday. Cookie squares. They're anything but. These cookies aren't square, they're squares. These squares aren't square. Can you square it? The shape of cookies to come. Cookie squares. It's hip to eat squares. The first square meal of your day. Your first square meal is anything but. Now you're square. Now it's square. Get square. Get squares. Cookies, part of a square meal. Part of a square meal. Artie Anderson turned away from his computer screen, squeezed the back of his aching neck, and looked at the clock above the corkboard to his left. It had just turned 4:58 p.m., according to a second hand that turned with an unnerving, stealthy smoothness. Artie believed a second hand ought to tick, that time should be delineated by an infinite parade of percussive seconds that could be drowned out but never entirely quieted, so that when you shut up, there it was, that mechanical ticking and talking, reminding you of everything that could or couldn't be. He gave a quick massage to the muscles along his spine, the ones whose tightness seemed to radiate and made his head ache every weekday around this time, then went back to the word processor. In the past 8 hours, he'd written 298 potential taglines for a new sugary breakfast cereal targeted at children precisely 1/3 his age. Though he didn't much enjoy the sample that Pearl Mills had FedExed to the office earlier in the month, he did feel like Cookie Squares deserved better than the nearly 300 lines he'd written so far. Quantity leads to quality, his boss told him his first week on the job, baring his mouth full of glistening, eerily perfect teeth. The most reliable way to write one great tagline is to write 1,000 bad ones first. Over the past 2 years, Artie had found the pithy advice to be more or less correct. Though a successful line could be written in mere seconds during a brainstorming session with coworkers. In fact, no fewer than 10 creatives in his office still claimed credit for Video Gallery's beloved "Bring Hollywood Home Tonight" line. Most of them were trees sprouted from the seeds of a dense, healthy forest. It was a forest whose perpetual creation brought him a sense of actual calm, since the more time he spent alone writing copy, filling page after page with every possible expression of a single idea, the less time he spent thinking about how profoundly uncomfortable he felt around his coworkers. Today there were no standouts on his list of 4 to 10 word phrases meant to convince petulant children to demand colorful boxes of die-cut sugar from their miserable parents, but there were enough of them that he felt as though work had been done. Artie sent the document to the printer, ripped off the perforated edges, and marched down the hall to Joe's office in the building's southeastern corner. He knocked gently, then pushed the half-open door enough to see Joe squinting at a pile of paper on his desk and rubbing his scalp. Joe was in his mid-40s, dressed like he was in his mid-30s, and played music as loudly as someone in their mid-20s. He had a wife and 3 kids and a dream job, but was proudest of his hair, which was long and thick and jet black without the aid of Just for Men. When he noticed Artie in the doorway, dressed for the part of copywriter with his starched blue shirt tucked tightly into a pair of khaki pants, Joe lowered the volume on his stereo and waved him in with a gesture that, if performed by almost anyone else, would have been welcoming. "Cookie square stuff," Artie said stiffly as he handed the taglines to Joe, who just tossed them on the only bare spot on his desk. After a pause, Artie reminded Joe that today was his birthday, that he'd already worked with Annette on layouts, and that he'd more than made up for the hours he'd be gone today elsewhere in the week, since he had to go home right at 5 to bake his own birthday cake in time for a dinner.